fact, there's a great film critic. Her name is Lindsay Ellis on YouTube. She makes a lot of great content talking about the subtext of film and the history of film and all the different stuff that goes on behind the scenes and whatnot. One of her greatest videos, I think, that she made, video essays, is about, that the Transformer movies had to get permission, had to work with military officials in order to use, I guess, like certain figures or like certain costumes or talk about certain things in their script.
Yeah.
And the thing is that, like, in other countries, you may have situations where the state intervenes in the media and entertainment to a larger degree. That's not as big here in America, with the exception to films that depict police and military. If you create any type of content that displays the military and the police, and it's not, and it's a major motion picture or a major, piece of content, they're going to want to comb through it, or you're going to be denied, or they're going to come through and wreck your shit to some degree.
Yeah, they'll blacklist you, and you'll be an independent film that no one ever sees.
Mm-hmm.
You won't get distribution on the major networks.
Yeah. You can have a Patreon, but, they might fuck that up for you, too.
Yeah, you can enjoy your small-scale shit, but you're never getting the mainstream if you're too critical.
And the reason why I wanted you to, take that and broaden the scope further is because I finally have gotten around to reading the official book on propaganda by the man himself, Edward Bernays. And of course that comes from the earlier 20th century, the 1900s, and was critical in helping a lot of companies that have been around today perfect their PR, their public relations, their marketing relations, and really sell people on products, because he was one of the figures that was cited by tobacco companies in helping them to sell cigarettes.
Yeah. And you see very similar tactics used for war propaganda.
Yeah, or for anything. I mean, the thing is that those same ideas are just about catering to human impulse. It's basically how Edward Bernays has laid a really good framework for understanding how to trigger people's tastes and motivations and shit. And his focus, and even though, he was a corporate, it was primarily...
It still pays to read him.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Even though he was a corporatist, and I'm sure he would be considered a right-winger in many respects, he talks about things very much in a way of just being effective and tries to get away from moralizing, just kind of saying, like, hey, this is what is effective for getting people to impulse buy or getting people whom are early adopters to latch on to a particular product or or whatever he talks about.
Yeah.
It's really just about effectiveness. I think that, I think somebody said that, as a matter of fact, Jake said it to me some time ago. He said everything is a psyop. And I'm sure that comes from something. I don't know if they just made that up.
Oh, it's a Facebook group.
Oh,
but
is it?
It's also a funny reflection on all of this crap because so much stuff is a psyop. Like even stupid, unimportant things are a psyop.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have if you look up the list, there's a list of I think it's more than 1,000 movies now that allow that have gotten assistance with their scripts from the Department of Defense specifically. The Department of Defense, the voice of the state, if you will. And a lot of them are not even remotely related to any of this. Some of them are just comedies. They're fucking dumb rom-coms that don't have anything to do with war. And you see it absolutely everywhere. Presenting these same thematic and simplistic narratives in Transformers, in stupid rom-coms, in simpering, disgusting pieces of crap like Zero Dark 30, and in American Sniper, and all of these fawning portrayals of what I would call, I guess, war criminals. And they seek to legitimize the action of the state and to cover for the sloppy propaganda narratives. One thing that one of my buddies, Steve, mentioned to me, and I think it was right around 2014 or something, was there was in one of the Avengers movies, which are some of the most heinous propaganda-filled shitty movies that are all the same movie remade over and over again, except for Thor Ragnarok. Thor Ragnarok's it's okay. It's still vile and full of propaganda, but it's a much better movie than most of the rest of them are. But all of these Marvel movies, they have this mentality of American exceptionalist thinking baked into all of them, and they've been made continuously since the start of the Iraq War. and they're all feeding us these cultural ideas of, accepting us as the good guys, believing that war is just, that never getting too deep into the political commentary lest we get lost in the weeds and accidentally make, an actual political point.
Mm-hmm.
But that sort of drifts into what you were talking about Bernays and like the propaganda. I think it's very critical to do what you're doing and to read oppositional literature about the same topics from alternative perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you get lost in your own orthodoxy, then you just end up smelling your own farts. Like after a while. Like you're like, my orthodoxy is the correct orthodoxy. Like I have some books, like one from the PDFs really. I guess they're not like physical books that I got off the internet from the Rand Corporation, like a study on conducting regime change operations, and also a PDF on conducting covert coups in governments produced by the Military War College.
Yeah.
And like you can read about like the theories of change that like revolutionary political figures like someone like Mao Zedong would write about, like, and you can read about how the security and intelligence services and the military writes about it, and you could see the commonalities.
Yes.
And like you said, it's kind of interesting to get that perspective of it. Like you said, Bernays without the flavor of morality to the writing, whereas many of these leftist authors are, they're moral firebrands. Their morality is the underlayment of their desire to change governments and societies and class structures. The extension of this propaganda into what is now dubbed public relations, putting out media flax to cover up for your embarrassment. Like you see it in the corporate world, like everywhere, like.
Or celebrities, or even prominent YouTubers.
YouTubers, production companies, media companies, anyone who gets hit with a scandal. Like they're just as much a part of the propaganda industry as anything else, and a lot of them are very pointed political actors. Like a good example of this is the Me Too controversy, all the stuff about Biden and how about Tara Reid, how she had come forward. To Time's Up. I think like Time's Up being like an actual organization, which was at that point I think operated by SDK Knickerbocker, which is a very very famous like. K Street lobbying firm in Washington. That this group, that SDK Knickerbocker was run by a Biden staff member, or someone who was in the Biden political orbit. And SDK Knickerbocker, which was running Time's Up, opted not to pursue the reporting on the Tara Reid shit after they had gotten people like Weinstein. He was just a little bit too politically connected. And, like, this group, Time's Up, like, before that, they were pretty universally seen, at least by the left and, like, the libs and the folks in the middle, like, the people who aren't, like, hard on the right or very, very, like, critical, social critical on the left. They were, like, seen as the good guys. Like, the exposers of rapists and of sexual abusers and the people who cover them up and prevent their, the victimized from speaking to the media and from being heard. The flags and the controllers of narratives, and those people, they'll only go after their own enemies. Like they won't go after their own guys, serve them.
Yeah, or they'll go after somebody who isn't, as you said, not too big of a player, because the thing is that like there's always different hierarchies at play, and so
sometimes they just need a guy to sacrifice.
Yeah, exactly. Because the thing is, there may have been plenty of people in Time's Up whom were like, yeah, let's take the shot at Biden, but may have had somebody else come up to them and be like, yo, we can't, like we won't, like like we won't be able to. We would basically be throwing ourselves on the sword, to potentially put a couple of dings in his armor, but we don't have enough. What I'm saying right now. Now, of course, that's the more generous perspective. I genuinely do just think that like they actually like Biden and don't give a fuck about his transgressions.
That's what I would tend to say. Like, not even, like, believe, but, like, say.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But the thing is, there's always that factor as well that, there are people whom they may want to take a shot at somebody but realize that their best shot will most likely backfire.
Certainly that SDK Knickerbocker was not willing to take that to court. And
no, absolutely. Yeah.
Regardless of their justification. But you see it a lot of other places. Like sometimes you see the groups not just as like parts of political parties, but as as the entities of intelligence operations. Like you'll see like I don't know, like Human Rights Watch, right? Like they're notorious for this. I think they backed the Guaido government in Venezuela when they attempted a coup.
Oh, really?
Initially. Yeah, but like what they do is they're like Human Rights Watch. Like what a name! But what do?
Right.
They go and lend that name to people who are acting either in coordination with a covert campaign or acting like as illegitimate political actors, or they will work to demonize political groups operating in foreign countries for the purposes of political change and external media campaigns against them.
Right.
Like they were very much like backing like the White Helmets, for example. That's another thing. I know it's very spicy.
In Syria, Assad and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah. The contention being that like the Syrian army had used chemical weapons against United States, or no, well, against someone in Iraq, Syrian civilians, but like.
Mm-hmm.
Like this was all this like concocted like piece of propaganda.
Yeah, that Assad against his own people when he was already winning the conflict.
Yeah, and there was debunked by all these national security state people who got thrown out of it, like Bill Binney and John Kiriakou and people who are former parts of the OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons.
Yes.
Like they had been intimidated and threatened by people in the Bush administration to go along with claims about Iraq, and here they were, the same thing again in Afghanistan, bullied and threatened and intimidated by John Bolton to go along with claims about Syria. Like they gassed us. It's like, well, let's look at the broad general use of chemical weapons in Syria. Like who uses them? Like regularly. That would be the United States. Yep, the United States, and mostly in like airstrikes and shit. Mm-hmm. And it gives them to their militias. And how many times have they used them? In excess of 10,000. In excess of 10,000 chemical weapons have been utilized in Syria by the United States. But who did this chemical weapons attack in Syria? Oh, it was obviously Assad. It was Assad.
Even though he was already winning the war and he was having a general, I don't know about his like approval ratings and whatnot, but I mean, it wouldn't behoove him to then gas the civilians of his own nation in the middle of such a severe conflict, especially when that gathers so much geopolitical interest, because of course this was another one that pitted Russian interests against the United States.
Yeah. Syria being the only formal military ally in that region that Russia has, and being their only foreign military base, like pretty big deal. We got thousand of them. They got
one handful. Yeah. Okay, I didn't realize I wasn't.
Well, like regionally one handful, like total. Like,
okay, yeah. I wasn't aware of that. I wasn't aware of that aspect.
Yeah. Well, it's all just lies and goofery, and there's other examples of propaganda operations in the Middle Eastern wars, like during Obama as well. There was the reporting by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, which is this UK-based journalism nonprofit, and they exposed the participation, and this is like a perfect example of like the Bernays thing, of a British propaganda firm getting a $500 million contract to produce fake Al-Qaeda terrorist videos.
Oh,
shit. To go out and be found in raids, and I'll send you my notes to it, which contains the URL to that story, so you can check it all out. But like, this is like a British...
I remember that story.
And like, it was covered so little. And it was so well reported on and well sourced, and this is like a mainstream, or at least an outlet which can't easily be red baited or blacklisted or something.
Right. Okay.
That did the original reporting on it.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's why, like I was saying at the very beginning, like that stuff about like Afghanistan, like it rhymes with and smells like this fake terrorist videos thing. The thing about Afghanistan, the sourcing for the Afghanistan troop assassination thing was just intelligence says. Like, whenever they tell you that, like, look at all the other things they've told you.
I'm somebody who, I'm sure that most people would probably agree that, look, when you're operating at these levels, yeah, you do have to have intelligence gathering and intelligence agencies and whatnot. But then when you couple that, this really aggressive propaganda campaign, and then controlling the apparatus of media and journalism, and then you have a populace like in the United States that's already generally undereducated and just falls under leadership, at least certain large contingents of the United States.
Yeah. It makes it all the easier to get away with.
It makes it all the easier to get away with. And now that, while a lot of people, even conservatives, may now say that, oh, Iraq was a mistake and that, Afghanistan was a mistake and whatnot, a lot of them are still pretty tepid about backing away from imperialism or even just pulling out of these occupations.
Or even recognizing it as a pattern.
Or even, you know what, that's actually another thing. They like to just look at shit as a one-off. They try to be like, hey, you know what, just give us another chance, saying we'll get it right this time. And it's like, no, y'all seem to have fucked it up. Ever since World War II, it seems like everything that we've gone and poked our nose into was something completely unnecessary and was just about consolidating power, which once again, I understand that that's what you do, that's what's, you do what's most effective to get those goals accomplished if that's what you want.
But there's no willingness in, the general public to be critical of empire or to identify empire as empire.
Well, the thing is that, so many people, don't know. Look how long it took, a Bernie Sanders, how long he's been doing his thing, how long it took for him to gain national acclaim, and then look at the fallout from him dropping out from the ending his campaign for the 2020 race and how it's caused so much sectarianism on the left, is that we are just operating with generations upon generations of misinformation, lack of information in general, not really given the context for all kinds of different shit. And so it's you probably couldn't even go, I'm sure if you went around to most Americans, more than half of them, if you talk to them about empire, they will probably only think about either Star Wars or shit 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. They don't know how to really put it into, they don't know how to recognize modern iterations of that shit. But I want to go into more abstract ones because, like you said, there was that list of movies and stuff, and some of them had nothing to do with talking about the military or war or politics or anything like that, but that they communicate an ethic that is not conducive to those efforts. And so one of the examples that I brought up, and I talked about this on one of my other episodes of my podcast, is a movie called Old Boy. And it's a Korean film.
I've seen that movie. Such a weird movie.
I really enjoy it, and there's a lot of interest in it. But really, at the end of the day, what it's about is it's just two men's journey on getting revenge on one another, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, you can talk all day about is the reasoning right or wrong? But it's really just you following the journey of these two men who have nothing else to live for but just getting revenge on one another. And that's it, and there's a bunch of other goofy stuff that happens all around that, but that's the center of it. What you may not know is that Spike Lee made an interpretation of this.
Oh, shit.
15, years later. And, honestly, I go back and forth on Spike Lee. To me, he's kind of he has a hit, and then he has a miss, and then he has a hit, and then he has a miss. That's kind of
He's a little bit reactionary, and he's a little bit revolutionary, and he's a little bit reactionary, and he's a little bit revolutionary.
Yeah, he goes, that's him. What he does in the film is that he takes away the self-centeredness of the revenge plot by the characters.
Yeah.
And he tries to make it into something greater, this isn't about me just needing to indulge, in this desire. It's, I'm doing this to protect my family, and I'm doing this for the sake of others. It's because this also plays into that of how Americans are taught to look at personal revenge. Because we are taught that you cannot vigilantism. And so the takeaway from that I get between those two different iterations of Old Boy, the original Korean one, and then the American one by Spike Lee, it's the framing of how each society looks at personal revenge. Because once again, in the North Korean one, and this is considered a classic film.
South Korean one.
This is a South Korean film, right? A South Korean film. It's considered a classic, and it's beloved by all over the fucking world, and especially in that society, right? I'm not going to make speculations about this is how the society looks at this, but it's kind of telling that this film is so popular and well respected and deals with personal revenge in such a direct way, where it's not so much moralizing, it's just looking at how each of these men go about at effectively getting revenge on one another, just for purely selfish reasons. Whereas in Spike Lee's one, it is a form of vigilantism where he has to right the wrongs before they happen to somebody else. So it's no longer just him doing this out of pure selfishness, his own self-centeredness. There's a level of heroicism that's attached to it. So it's kind of like displacing, so that way you don't have to feel so that way you don't have to start asking the questions of like, oh, wait a minute, is either of them in the right or wrong? Like, who's in the right or the wrong? You know what I'm saying, for seeking revenge on one another.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to deal with those questions because it's just framed as, no, this person is just flat out the bad guy and they need to die and by any means necessary, and he's doing it, the character, he's not doing it for himself, he's doing it for his family. You know, because it's kind of hard to tell somebody, fuck your family, don't bother trying to save them. You know, you're never going to hear that, or you'll rarely hear that. You know, so it's kind of, I just use that as an example. And Spike Lee's Old Boy was not popular. It's shit in many different respects. But once again, I just think it's one of those things where it reflects, you know what I'm saying, of what the director, the writer, is trying to show about society, or what they even feel themselves.
It's even in like our like kids cartoons and shit. Like you see the same, like, not from the same perspective as like with those old shows, like with the Just World theory, where you're trying to represent that the world is fair and, you know, we're all just getting along and everything's good and fine. But you see it in like there's good guys and there's bad guys, and there's not really much like moral gray area in children's cartoons in terms of like what's just and not just.
Yes.
And in the world, there's an immense amount of it. It's almost inescapable in most situations.